So I'm still looking at this compressor display. I was just kind of looking around to see what was here. First of all, questions about alerts and why we would do them. And okay, remember also an alert is different than a threshold in a chart. We looked at that yesterday very quickly. We added a threshold line to a chart. That is simply for display. The threshold line is drawn in the chart, just as part of it. It's not an actual alert. It doesn't have any actions associated with it or anything like that. A couple of other comments about alerts, and you may have seen this when we were looking at the home page. We have alerts that are called connection alerts, and that is triggered if your connection to the monitored object stops. And you can see there's one right here. I should have pointed out. And the message is hard-coded. It says, I cannot connect to the server to collect data. And what that means is EDM has not been receiving data for this data feed. It usually takes a couple of intervals before he decides that it's actually dropped. So he does do a certain amount of infrastructure monitoring on his own. The one below here, you can see data collectors unavailable. This was because we were doing maintenance and the EDM process was running, but the DCS process was not. And both of them have to be running. So you can see there was a message about that. So that's what we were seeing. Now, what you can see up here, look, we actually had an alert that was triggered because of the alerts that we just created. And notice we've got the conveyor motor is, actually it did go over 25. And we've got the other motor RPM is greater than 22. So what EDM tells us in the alert notification is two things. What is the value of the metric right now? So we got a data block at 10:30 and 31 seconds. And this conveyor right motor RPM is the value 26. I'm looking at the second one, 26.255, and that is greater than 22. And 22 is where we set our alert. So we can do a couple of things. Remember, we can click on, there we go, we can click on the link to the metric itself, and you can see that we are kind of going up and down. Remember in the chart, when we were looking at the report, it was kind of flirting a little bit around that 22 value. So that's why we actually have two trigger alerts for this metric. There's one here at 10:16 that lasted a few minutes. And then we got another one at 10:29, and it's currently 10:31, and it's still active. Okay, so then we have another, we have both the right and the left motors have exceeded the thresholds. Now we're back under right here. We went back under 25 and then over 25, and that triggered the second alert. That's how we're seeing the display, and why we're seeing the display here with a couple of different actions, a couple of different triggered alerts, right? Because it recovered and it went back. This is one thing that we've heard, a term that we've heard is an alert storm or an email storm, where alerts happened so fast right next to each other that you would get multiple alerts at the same time. Not just the two that we see, but potentially even more than that, all within a short period of time, maybe within 5 or 10 minutes. And that's one of the reasons that we had those settings trigger after, So once you see the alert, right, we cross the threshold, but wait a couple of intervals before you actually sound the alarm, right? And then also reset after. That would be after we went back under 22. Do you want EDM to wait a few intervals before he starts checking and sending another alert? Because there are times, right, when that's going to happen, the value of the metric is just right around the threshold value. Okay, so a couple of things you can do. You can use these alert settings. You know, don't send an alert or don't send an email until the alert has been active for a certain amount of time. Or you could set your value higher, right? Well, we set one of ours at 25 and look what happened. It got triggered anyway. Now, we had again, the Clairvaux. We can go ahead and click that and have EDM run the Clairvaux report. The value of our metric went up. And at that time, we didn't have any event data for this connection. Remember, we talked about that. But I have these values within this data set that are very closely correlated. And I can look at the strength here. Remember, the one is almost exactly the same, left and right motor speed. And we have a couple that we knew were statuses, so they're going to be either above or below. And like we did before, we can pop this out so that we can play with those metrics and add them to the chart and take them out. So this is the Clairvaux report for this alert that was triggered. Now, what does the email look like? I did get an email, and here it is. So the email came in from the packing line. It was February 17th. Here's my metric. The value of the metric is 24.18, which is greater than 22. And you can see that the message that we put in is right there, along with a link to the EDM instance if I want to turn that on. Okay. So that's, like I said, if we wanted to include a whole bunch of text, I can certainly do that, and it would be included in the email that was generated.
I have a question, Debbie.
Yes.
How we help our clients respond to an event. I understand that we can send and create correlations and send multiple messages, sometimes even write the scripts to those MES systems out there. But can you talk a little bit about what happens after the alert is resolved? Do we have a role there within alerts? How do we instruct the operators to resume? Is there such a thing?
There is an option for alert cleared. And I may have mentioned it, but I didn't go into it in a lot of detail. When you configure the alert, let's just pick any one. There's our alert group, and we'll look at this Strapper alert since we just created it. When you create the alert and we said to send an email, we have an option to say actions on alert cleared. And what that means is when the alert clears, what do you want me to do? And we have those exact same options. So the reason that this was implemented is because kind of what you were talking about, the operators go to look at, you know, the machine or the system where the alert was triggered from, and it was back in bounds. So there's two things. First, what can we do when the alert is actually triggered? We can send the email, send the SNMP trap. There was a command, so we can execute a command which would be on this system where EDM is installed. Well, there's a lot of things you can do with batch runs, and scripts that can be executed that can do different things. So we have, that's the first one. So if you can execute a command that will cause some kind of action to take place, we would just put the name of that command right here. The same thing with sending an SNMP trap. Sometimes you send the SNMP trap to another, like a ticketing system or another kind of controller, and the trap is parsed and interpreted and can then instigate an action from there. But what happens in our instance where the alert is triggered, but then it kind of resolves itself fairly quickly? We don't really need to do a whole lot of stuff. And so what we can do is we can send another email or another SNMP trap that basically says, this has been cleared. You don't need to take any action. And that would happen in our instance with our triggered alerts. That would be triggered at this time, the last time of the alert, when we received the information that the alert had been cleared, or the value that we're watching is back underneath the threshold level that we had set. So I hope that answered your question. Couple of different ways to it.
Thank you.
Couple of different ways to approach it. You're welcome. So our threshold was successfully breached, and everything is back in bounds. Since EDM saves these, and I mentioned this a little bit ago, the default is to save all of these alert notifications for 60 days in the system. And that is configurable. You can save them for a year if you want. But what that means is I can go back to any of these data sources or any of the alerts and find out, you know, how many times was this particular alert triggered in the last 30 days or in the last 60 days? Or how many alerts were triggered for the packing line altogether? And so that's the reason that we keep these alert notifications and store them in the database, in the admin database, actually, so that we can go back and look at them later on. Now, I've mentioned before that these are all of the system-wide alerts for all of the systems that we are monitoring and any alert that we have set. But if you go to the individual connection, for instance, the strapper that we were just looking at, under the connections information, it says, where are the triggered alerts? So these are all of the triggered alerts for all of the packing line systems. But then if I want to look at the individual ones, I can go to a specific connection and look at the triggered alerts just for that one connection. So you can see here in the last, I don't know, we just triggered a bunch of these alerts. But anything that's still in the system for this data source will be maintained, and we can go back and analyze that. And sometimes you're right when you go, oh, you know, it seems like I've been getting a lot of alerts from connection X or for a particular piece of equipment. And you can go in and look and see, you know, yeah, I did, or no, I really didn't have as many as I thought I did. So that's the reason that we keep all of the connection, by connection, we keep all of the alert information for each one of them. So you can see how long they lasted and things like that. Okay, I wanted to talk about one last analysis feature, which is forecasting. So far, we've been looking at current behavior and a little bit of what happened in the past, right, with previously triggered alerts. One of the features in EDM is called Foresight, which is our forecasting mechanism. And the way that we forecast is by metric. Anything that we collect, so any of the values that are included in a data set, we can forecast And the forecast is based on previous behavior. So for instance, I want to see maybe what this, strapper is going to do. I'm pretty sure I know what the forecast is going to look like. Or what is the Linux system going to do in the future? So the way that we do this is we go into the forecast settings, and the forecast settings are basically what system do you want to forecast and how often do you want to forecast. So I'm going to call this strapper. And I can forecast daily, weekly, or monthly. So we're going to stick with day because it's just easy. And I'm going to ask EDM to use whichever algorithm for the forecast he wants. So what we're going to do is look at the past few days worth of data and forecast what's going to happen tomorrow. There are several different, mathematical algorithms that have been developed over the years to do that forecast. One is just to do a straight trend line. One is to do a logarithmic analysis, and the other one is STL, and I can never remember Lowe's. The L is for Lowe's, but anyway, I can never remember exactly what that stands for. And that's kind of includes the seasonality or the movement of the data. So we can select any of the forecasts that we want. We were looking at the strapper. And then you remember we talked about the report templates the other day. The template is the group of metrics and charts that are used to display a report. Well, we use either a chart or a template to base the forecast on. And you'll see what I mean in a minute when we look at the output. But what that does is it tells EDM to look at the metrics that are included in that group and then forecast each one of them. Okay, so I'm going to say save. And now I have a forecast. And we're going to tell EDM to go ahead and run it. You can see by the last run date, by default, it runs at 30 minutes past midnight. But I can force EDM to do a forecast for me. Okay, so the forecast is running. Now, I told EDM to go ahead and pick whichever forecast it liked, but let's create another one and force it to do, I'm going to create another forecast. And this time, I'm going to create a forecast for the system, the Linux operating system. And so we'll find the actual Linux system. And we're going to base this one on, I have a overview called Linux System Overview. And that just includes the CPU and memory and things like that. So this time I'm going to force it to do the trend. So that means show me straight lines. And I'll save that one. So let's force EDM to execute that forecast. It shouldn't take too long. And then we'll go out and look at the forecast results. There we go. So it ran, you can see it ran right now. The way that you look at the forecast results is to go out and look at the connection. So here's our strapper connection. Everything is in the packing line group, and these are individual data sources. The little settings icon to the left is either to take me to the configuration or to, okay, I'm moving too fast here, or show me the forecast. The forecast is basically the report that we were looking at with that data. So we said, show me the daily forecast. So this is the last day of data, right? So the 16th of February. And then EDM forecasts what's going to happen in the next day. You remember, he does take the seasonality, the ups and downs, into consideration. The reason that all of the reports look the same is because they're using the same two metrics, and any extra settings that we put in are kind of forgotten. It's just a line chart. So here's our bigger line chart. What we can do is pop out the entire previous data, and so it was going up and down. Okay, EDM doesn't think it's going to go down quite so far, but he's also kind of compressing this a little bit for us. Okay, but he's going to run this every day. He's going to run this same forecast. And if you do a past forecast, when the data is extreme like this, it's a little harder, but when he's extreme like this, we can have EDM. What he's doing is he's going back for multiple days, for about the past 20 days, and running a forecast for us. Should have done this already, because it'll take a minute. So I can go back into a previous forecast. Now, I don't have data for all day on the 17th, because it's currently, 10:49 in the morning. But if I go to a previous forecast, where I have not only the forecast, but I also have the actual data that was then collected, I can have EDM display both of those things together. And he's going to make me wait for this. Okay, by default, we keep 20 forecast result sets. So he's actually creating those 20 forecast result sets, and that's why it's taking a little bit longer than I had thought. Okay, what's the value of the forecast? Well, a couple of things. It can warn you that you're going to run out of resources. And by that, I mean that, if you're looking at battery, for instance. So if you have your cell phone and you're monitoring the battery, then it can tell you, based on the past, how long your battery lasted. It can tell you how long it's going to last this time. Maybe cell phone is not the best example for that. In the IT world, it could be transactions. Over the last months, you've been adding new processes, and when you added those processes, you're taking more and more resources to execute them, or you're adding more transactions per day to the system. And EDM will just show you that, if you've been growing over the last month or two, you've maybe grown 10%, and so he can forecast when you're going to reach some threshold, whether it's 3 per day or something like that. So let's go back and look. Okay, I interrupted that because I didn't want to wait too long. So let's look at our Linux connection, where we had done the Linux. We did a Linux, here it is, forecast. And the difference here is that this forecast that we created is a straight line, because I said, I just want to see the trend line. And you can see a couple of these are actually moving. Like here, disk percent busy starts at 513, and it's not going fast, but it's going up to 5.31 here. The network seems to be fairly flat. So the display of the trend line is a straight line based on what was there before, as opposed to the STL results that include the seasonality of the data, where it'll go up and down and up and down. This is the type that is going to be really good about forecasting when you're going to run out of resources. In this case, too, the memory, let's pop out this chart. Okay, we had memory, we have some dips in memory, but you can see in general our memory available has been kind of going down over time. Over in this time period right here, it really was never over 40%, as opposed to at the beginning, a few days ago, it was well over 40%, 41%. So it is gradually going down. So that's what I mean by notifying you that the resources can be short. We looked, if you remember, when we were looking at let's take a look at this one. When we were looking at setting up the forecast, we had an option to put an alert group. And we have our Strapper alerts. We're going to go ahead and put that on there. And we'll say save and rerun this forecast. Okay, run forecast. It should update us here in a second, 10:52. So I did update 10:54. So let's go back and look at the forecast for the Strapper and see if it did add in that alert group. Sometimes you can see them and sometimes you can't. Okay, yes. So we had set 2 different alerts on these metrics. Remember, we have, even though we can't see them, we do have 2 metrics in the display, right? One is just overwriting the other one. So we had 2 alerts or 2 thresholds, and those threshold lines at 22 and 25 come from the alerts that we had set. And so they are included in the display. If any of the displays that we have included those metrics where we had a threshold created, it will show up here. And you can actually have it trigger them. It'll be like an out of process or an out of bounds alert for the future. Any questions about forecasting? Okay, very quickly, I'm going to take a quick look at this data structure, the directory structure that's under behind EDM. Now I'm running this on a Windows system, so it's going to be similar. If we take a look at my File Explorer, our default location is to install on the C drive under Program Files, Sightline. We have the data collector service. We have a Java instance. We have PostgreSQL, remember, was the admin database that was installed. We installed a Power Agent, and that's what's monitoring this Windows system that I was installed on. The NMIS instance that we were looking at is actually a Linux system, so that's why we were seeing some Linux metrics. And then Wildfly is the basis of the browser display for the EDM instance. So under each one, the 2 things that we're really going to be interested in are the EDM instance and the DCS instance. So EDM is under the Wildfly display, and under this standalone, there is a log directory. So whenever we have any issues, EDM logs in the EDM admin log. And there are also a couple of other logs that he uses. For instance, the forecast. If you think that the forecast didn't run, we can go ahead and open this, but it's going to tell you when a forecast was actually executed, and then it's going to tell you how long it took. So occasionally you don't have enough data to complete a forecast, and EDM will tell you that as well. Okay, what's in the EDM admin log? Quite frankly, these can get fairly lengthy. So it's Java, and Java is very verbose in its logging. But if there's a problem, it'll show up here. Okay, and it turns out maybe we'll have to investigate that. At some point, there was a Postgres access that generated that particular error. Okay, but it also tells us when people log in and when they log out. Okay, so that's always useful to know. Now for the DCS instance, the same thing. Under the DCS directory, there's a log subdirectory, and we have a collector log. And if we're using Sightline DB, the database, to store all of our data, there's a Sightline DB log. So basically between those two, EDM tells you what exactly is going on, and if there are any errors, it's going to be logged there. On a Linux system, it's the same directory structure, but it's installed under user local. And then you have the Sightline directory structure that looks just like this. We also have logging for every connection that we make, and that's under the con logging directory. And so I have connections to several different systems on this instance, and you can see there's the current one, and then there are a few. I think we keep 5 past copies of each of the connection logs. So if you're trying to connect to something and the connection fails, this is where the information is going to be located. The reason that this is important is because when we're first setting things up, it is possible that your first connection attempt isn't successful, and you need to go in and take a look. Sometimes it's a port issue. Sometimes it's just, that it times out and you need to expand that setting. So there are a lot of different settings that are used. So EDM also has some configuration files that are stored in that directory structure. And basically that tells EDM where to store the data, the port numbers to use to communicate between the processes and things like that. So questions about that, or questions about anything that we've talked about? Or is there anything that you want to look at again?
Sorry, Debbie, we would have to rewind a little bit, but before we went into the forecast, at the last part of the alarms, when you were checking an alarm that was going off or was active at the moment.
Yes.
Showing you the times when the threshold was crossed. And can you do a correlation right then and there from that graph? Because it was the part where the memory went down to 0.
Yep. So when you pop up the chart, you get the regular chart metric. The chart menu. And this is pretty much the same menu that you would have from any of this popped out reports, right? So yeah, even more complete, right? So we are able to, let me find that pop out chart, it's right here. So we're able to do the correlation right from there. You can also, we talked about this a little bit too, you can have multiple alerts. So I can add a second alert in right from here, or I can go in and maybe even add other metrics to the chart. So EDM knows that I'm looking at the packing line, but I could even add in an alert from some other, I don't know, here, I'll use the case.
Well, my question was actually, once you notice that the memory went down, and you actually said something must have happened that made the capacity of the system go down to 0.
Yes.
Can you do a correlation in the same chart without leaving the chart saying like,
right, I see what you're saying.
What happened at the same time?
It's going to actually pop out a new window for the chart right here. Okay. Now I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's going to pop it out here. Now, your other option, though, is to go back to the alert and then just run the Clairvaux. So it's going to give you those results kind of together, right? So we had the alert chart, and this is a little more current, but then it's got the correlation results down here at the bottom. But then you can pop out either one, right? We can pop this one out and it becomes the alert threshold chart, and we can pop out the correlation results just like we had seen before.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But they are going to be separate, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay, so let me invite you again to send an email with any questions that occur to you. The user's guide for EDM is actually pretty good. It's very detailed. For instance, we looked at several different types of charts, but it will go through all of the, all of them and how you can use them and mix and match them together. You can log in to this instance. We have a demo instance of EDM at demo.sightline.com, or this one, we would have to create a credential set for you, a user ID, and log in. But you are very welcome to log into this site and go ahead and take a look at it. You can, again, ask us anything, send an email and ask anything that you, any questions that you might have. Okay. And like, as Zach said, feel free to email Zach or me or support, and we'll make sure that you get the information, or we'll point you to where it might be. So other questions? Well, this actually went a little faster than I had thought. That's not a bad thing. But if I think of anything that I've forgotten, I'll shoot out a quick email. It was really to give you an opportunity to see the EDM interface, talk about how it can be used and where it can be used. So if you have any thoughts or questions about, hey, I have this environment, what do you think? And we'll be happy to address that for you.
Deb, will you get to talk a little bit about the product, the standards that we are adding to it, a little bit about the future of where we're heading with the product?
Where are we headed with the product? There are two different mechanisms, or I should say two different ways that we add new features to the product, or how they get into the product. Either someone here, which would be Sightline, our partners, our users, suggests an addition, or, users, that would be a new feature request that comes from a user. So those are the sources of our ideas. Sometimes a direction change would be just to enhance something to do a little bit more. For instance, Clairvore was a new feature that was added because we were using alerting and we were using correlation, and it made sense to put them together. Other things would be like the OPC connection, right? Traditionally, we would have to receive data from a process. Well, OPC doesn't do that. OPC gets the data from the PLC, and then we subscribe to it. So it's a slightly different interface. So those types of things are for adding new data sources, which we are always looking to do. And remember, once we can attach or somehow get data from a data source, no matter what it is, whether it's manufacturing equipment, a bottling machine, a packing line, or a piece of equipment in the infrastructure, like a camera or a router or a door, right? A door lock, right? We have the little badges that unlock our doors. If we can get information from that equipment, then we can monitor it. And if we can monitor it, then we can analyze it, we can alert on it, we can correlate on it. So Where we're going in the future right now, we are looking at enhancing our alert mechanisms. The alerts that we've been looking at have all been fairly straightforward. With RPMs greater than 22. We're looking at enhancing that to make them much more complex. So if the status is 1 and RPMs are greater than 25 or RPMs are less than 10, now trigger the alert. Things like that. So we're enhancing the alert mechanism, and we're looking at some more multi-tenant features to make EDM more software as a service. So those are the things that I can think of right off the top of my head.
Since we have partners here, technology and automation services partners. On the IT side, we have a number of partners such as SAIC and Unisys and many others. The opportunity for our partners with this platform in an actual project does require some skill sets. Can you talk a little bit about what partners typically do in the implementation or working with the product, or what type of skill sets or training they need to manage putting Sightline to work on a particular client? Just in a generic format, nothing very specific, because I'm sure they want to understand what it takes to actually put this to work for one of their clients.
But first, I'll say that it depends on the customer that you're talking to. Are they an IT-oriented customer, or are they a manufacturing customer? Because the first thing, of course, is understanding what we're going to be doing, right? What we're going to be monitoring and how we're going to be receiving or retrieving that data. So in the IT environment, you generally have an admin. They don't have to know exactly what EDM is doing, but we can help them install the power agents on their servers and set up the connections. And it's a different implementation than in a manufacturing environment. In the manufacturing environment, we also have to have knowledge of the PLCs, the OPC server. There are so many different types of PLCs. Jorge, I see your question about the most frequent competition. So I'll address that in a second. Competition. Make a note to myself. But getting back to the implementation. So generally, we need to be a little more hands-on in that environment, because the IT skills for implementing EDM and getting those connections set up may or may not be there. But we also need to have the knowledge of the environment so that we can set up the connections for the OPC servers, or the file connections. We may be having a batch run that is formatting the data and creating our CSV files maybe every second, every minute, however often, and then EDM automatically reads those files from the specified location. So it really depends on the environment. We've encountered multiple different types of PLCs, for instance, and what that means is different OPC connections that have to be created. In that instance, also, we have what we call a mapping file. We create the mapping file, and EDM has an interface to do that. He attaches to the OPC server and basically says, give me the list of everything that you have available. that could be 1,000 different pieces of information, and the customer might want to see them, which is fine, but the customer might not want to see them. And what we do in that case is we cull the information available down to the information that we want. So we say, okay, there's 1,000 pieces of information. We really only want these 100. And so we create the filter, right? The mapping file is basically a filter, and use that to collect only the information that we're really interested in. So there are several moving parts, but once we start doing multiple implementations, there's a lot of similarities between them. And then connecting those data sources into EDM. Again, you know, an OPC connection from the EDM side works the same way. It's getting the connection and the understanding of what's on the other end. The other thing is, you know, deciding things like how much data do you want to store? Okay, so that's going to be a discussion with the client. How much data do you want to store, and how often do you want to collect it? And what is the infrastructure? And that helps us decide what mechanism we can use to actually retrieve the data. Sometimes it's a pull, like OPC, we actually subscribe, right? Once we make the initial connection, we are just subscribing to the data. Sometimes it's a retrieval, like with SNMP. If we wanted to get data from a router, we have to go out every interval and request the data, right? So it's not just saying, okay, if you've got data, send it to me, right? It's every time I have to go and get a fresh data set. So that also makes a difference as to how I can actually get the data from the monitored instance. But remember, from what we've seen over the last couple of days, EDM can have data from multiple different sources all in the same instance. So that's a good thing, as long as we can reach all of the different monitored objects on the same network, and, or I should say from EDM, we can store it all in the same EDM instance. And the advantage to that is, if there's a cause and effect relationship where one data source, or one manufacturing piece of equipment can impact the next one, we can correlate between those data sources, right? So if we can keep it all in the same EDM instance, we can do a lot of cross-platform or cross-system correlation and display, right? So we can mix and match. If you remember, we can create charts and reports that have data from all of the different pieces of equipment on a packing line. So in terms of skill sets, it's really understanding the environment, okay? And then we need someone with the technical know-how. So two pieces: understanding the environment and having the technical know-how to create the connection. Competition. Do you mean what kind of competition, or specific companies that we've run into?
Yeah, I mean the competitors that we have in the market, the ones that you see the most when you visit the customer and the customer is evaluating some solutions like us, which will be the competition that you see in the market.
There's one competitor that we seem to run into a fair amount, and they're called Ignition. But there are several out there. So in the manufacturing side, there are companies that have historians. So basically, EDM is a historian, right? I think of it as a database with performance information, or information about the performance of the factory, right? So the different things that are in the factory, no matter what it is that they're doing. So if there's already a historian, in place at that factory or at that company, that very well may be a competitor. So in that case, we need to find out what it is that they're doing. So sometimes people will have something that was implemented, but they're really not using it. So that's the first thing. In the IT world, there are many different competitors. There's SolarWinds. They do monitoring of networks and open systems like Windows and Linux. There's one called Help Systems, and they do mainframe monitoring. But the advantage we have with our partners there is that we and they both already have a large client base, and so we can use that to either expand our presence or to it at the site, or to expand our presence to similar sites like that. So the competition is really not so much specific companies, but just similar softwares where there's a historian involved.
Okay, so the idea is to focus more on the monitoring of OT instead of monitoring of real-time IT. Is that correct?
Well, either one, because EDM will interface with all of those different types of data sources.
Yeah, but you're mentioning that, and that is true, that in the part of IT, so real-time monitoring of IT, there's a lot of competitors there. There are a lot of companies that have been in market for many years. I don't know if that will be hard sometimes to compete with, or the idea is to have both the IT monitoring and the OT monitoring.
Yes, and the advantage of using EDM is that we can do both.
Okay.
So we can have the IT group who are monitoring, maybe the IT infrastructure in the factory at the same time that the IoT group, right, the factory manager and the production manager, they have their data sources at the same time. And in the same platform, if it ever becomes necessary, right? Because sometimes there are, Windows or other systems involved in the monitoring in the production itself that are running different things. And if we can monitor all of that with the same interface or the same user interface, that's an advantage to them.
Okay.
And what I would say one of the bigger advantages of EDM is that, yes, there are a lot of tools that monitor different computer metrics and things like that. But EDM is one of the few tools that I've seen that actually allows you to store this data, graph this data, use it over store it for long periods of time, and just overall review. I think, in my opinion, EDM is superior to a lot of the other tools that are out there.
Okay, got it. And another question that I have in the solutions in the web page of Sightline, there's a specific solution for cybersecurity. Can you please elaborate something about that?
That is not in, I haven't used it a lot, we'll say that. We do have a solution. It's called SIAS, S-I-A-S. And it's, Brandon is really the person that has the most knowledge. And that is one of the new things that we have implemented, or I should say that we have developed over the last couple of years. Basically, the cybersecurity solution is to monitor for things like attacks, where you'll see somebody try and get into the factory, for instance, right? So they're going to hack your factory or hack some piece of it just to cause trouble. So when we monitor as a result of the monitoring, we see something that's out of bounds, we can isolate using the SIAS interface. It's SIAS. What that does is it basically isolates that piece of equipment or that server, whatever it is, from the rest of the network, so that it's no longer a vulnerable spot until we can figure out what happened and resolve that issue. But I'll have to admit that I'm not the expert on that one. Brandon has the better understanding technically of what it's doing under the covers. But it's really looking at quarantining anything that's suspect so that no further damage can be done.
Okay, kind of detection and response.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. That was a good question. Okay, I would even get Brandon to come in here and do that, but he was actually traveling yesterday, so he's not online yet. Other questions? Okay, so if anything occurs to you, like we said, send an email. We'll try and get information about. I'll try and send you more information, Jorge, about the cyber security.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go out and look and see what's out on the website that might, that I might be able to just point out very quickly.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, great. Well, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. We are looking forward to a holiday weekend, so that's a good thing. And we will be talking to everybody, I'm sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much, and have a great long weekend.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank you, Debbie.
Have
Have
some
a good
tequila. Have some tequila there.
Hey, I do have some good tequila.
Excellent. Excellent.
Wow.
Now we're talking.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Debbie. Thank you.